Hello, everybody. Today, I wanted to talk about a series of books that I've been reading over the past couple years. Still not finished with it, but it is incredible. And I want everyone to know about it. I'm sure some of you already do, but that series is the Dandelion Dynasty by Ken Liu. It is an epic fantasy series, sort of based on Chinese history, but in a universe of its own. Ken Liu is mainly known for his short stories and also for his translation work. He's translated The Three Body Problem into English. He's also translated a couple different collections of Chinese short science fiction into English, which is also incredibly good. He has two collections of short stories, one of which is called The Paper Menagerie, which is probably the most popular one, and then he has another one called The Hidden Girl, which is also very good. Some of his stuff has been adapted into TV. There's an episode of Love, Death, and Robots based on one of his short stories. There's also a show that was on AMC Plus, I think, that was based around some of the Hidden Girl short stories. I don't remember the title off the top of my head, but I will put it here once I edit the video. The first book in the series is called The Grace of Kings. It's right here. That first book, while very good, almost feels like a history textbook of the world that he creates. The way it's written is compelling, but also a little dry and a little tedious at times. But with that said, if you can kind of push through that and get to the second book, which is called The Wall of Storms, which is right here, you'll find that all the kind of work you did and that he did in that first book really pays off in the second one. Wall of Storms really just completely blew me away. They're giant books. I mean, I think the first one is 600 plus pages, and then the second one's almost at 800, or maybe even more than 800. But the way it's written is, at least in the second book, and now the third one that I'm reading, is so smooth and so well paced and so engaging that they just kind of fly by. I've been in the middle of reading Mistborn, and I'm in the middle of the third book, and I'm like kind of stuck where it is really good, but it's like the plotting and the pacing and everything is just a little too slow for my liking. Um, but with that said, I've also been reading the third Dandelion Dynasty book, which is called The Veiled Throne. It's in the other room, otherwise I would show it to you, but I will also put it right here. And I want to go back to it so bad. I want to just sit down for 8 hours one day and just like chug through the whole thing because it's been so good. Unfortunately, I have a job and cannot do that most days. The way he writes is, I know this is kind of a weird word to describe writing, but it's really efficient. His economy of words is just incredible. Same thing in his short stories, and same thing in the way he has translated other people's works. He has this way of like conveying the information that he wants to get across in a way that is undoubtedly pretty and well worded, but there's like not an ounce of fat on it. It's exactly what he wants to say and the exact number of words he wants to say it. And I really appreciate that. Reading other types of work where it's really verbose and really kind of flowery and all this other stuff can be fun. But at the same time, like sometimes I'm reading those books, whether it's like David Foster Wallace or David Mitchell, or even like books that I love. I'm trying to look for an example on my shelf here that would fit that bill. But the way he writes is just so simple and clean and good. And it's kind of hard to step away from the way he writes and move into something else when I'm reading. I just kind of want to go back to that. Like I don't know, it's like driving a really nice car and then going back to your like beater car after that. The story, as he has described it, is a silk punk epic fantasy story. Kind of similar to steampunk in that there is an emphasis on kind of like technology, but the aesthetic of it is completely different. There's not like brass and steam and all this other stuff going on. It's much more literally about silk and like bamboo and technology that's more reminiscent of like ancient Chinese history. And it's not just for show. It's not something that is just an aesthetic choice. It's something where a lot of the plot and a lot of the story, um, a lot of like the crucial parts in the story completely depend on these like technological innovations that are happening in the middle of the story. I don't want to give anything away, but there are often big moments in these books that completely rely on the advancement of technology within this world. And it's so cool seeing those moments come to fruition once you get to them. The way he writes his battle scenes they're just incredible. Kind of similar to Brandon Sanderson in a way where there's like a lot of work that you have to do to get to the payoff. But the way he paces it is so perfect. The way he chooses to sort of let the moments of violence and outburst and action come out during these battle scenes is so pinpointed and direct and kind of efficient, like the rest of his writing, that it packs such a punch. And it's not one of those things where you're kind of waiting for the buildup of it and it's getting boring. It's like, oh no, the tension is rising and you're just like, please get to this part. But there's never a dull moment. The other thing about these books is that there are a ton of characters. I've never read Game of Thrones. I've watched the show. But similar to that, there are a lot of different POV moments. The characters that are in the first book are definitely in the second book, but the point of focus has shifted away from the protagonists in the first book to other people. I don't want to say who they are because I don't want to give anything away, but from book to book, there is kind of this point of emphasis that changes. And you would think that that would be kind of frustrating. I know, for instance, I really like the Wayfarer series by Becky Chambers. But I remember reading that first book and then moving on to the second one and being kind of like, damn, I really wish those other people were still here. But that's not the case with this one. The progression from the characters in the first book to the second book is super logical and super engaging. It's not like he just shifts focus and that's just where you're at. Like, he does the work. He does all of the character development that you would want to see if you're moving away from characters that you become familiar with. And there's moments in these books where it focuses on a character that serves a specific purpose and they're not going to be around for long, but he makes you empathize with them and he makes them these fully developed, like, real characters. And he just does such a good job at it. There's also a lot of language and mythology and in-world history that comes along with these books. That's kind of why the first one feels like a history book in a lot of ways, because it's setting up this world that you're stepping into. It has its own language. It has its own way of pronouncing things. Like, there's a whole note in the beginning of the book talking about, like, if you see this type of name, this is how it's pronounced. The list of characters in the beginning of the book is incredibly long. And when you move from book to book, it kind of gets longer and longer. There's a whole mythology within the book with all these, like, different gods. And once you move from book to book, it kind of gets bigger and bigger. I haven't reread the series because I'm not finished with it yet, but I think that if you were to go back and reread this series and go through it again, there would be so much more to pick up on, because there's just so much groundwork that he lays about the land that you're in and the mythology and the religion. And when I'm reading it, like, it's all great, but I don't know the names of every single, like, figurehead within the religion that's going on. There's also a big point of emphasis on philosophy and these different kind of philosophical teachings and schools of thought within the book. And when you're in it, it's great. Like, the way he's describing it and the way he's having characters kind of extol the values that he's set up here is really engaging. But I think if you went through it again, you could really get invested. And, if I was that type of person to get, like, super nerdy about it, like if there was like a Silmarillion addendum to this series, I don't know if I'd read it, but if I was, it's so rich and there's so much to get out of it. I'm really looking forward to finishing the third book and also moving on to the fourth book. I have this really nice copy of the fourth one that I actually bought directly from Ken and his wife, Lisa. A while back, they did, like, a little Etsy store with personal copies of his books that he had signed and put up there. And it's really cool. There's, like, a little note in there, and it's up on my, like, shelf of all my nice books. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing what's next. And then beyond this series, I'm really curious to see what he does next. I think this was probably, like, a huge undertaking for him to write. I know that the third book was supposed to be the last one, but it got so big that he split it into two books. And so, to create something like that in your head and put it on paper has to be exhausting. And, to live in that world for that long has got to take a toll. So I don't know what he's going to do next. I think if you're new to Ken Liu, I wouldn't start with this series. What I would do is probably read The Paper Menagerie first, and then probably The Hidden Girl after that, and then move on to this series. You could jump right into it, but I think that to fully appreciate the type of writer he is, I would work on his short fiction first, just to kind of get an idea of what his style is and kind of his capabilities. I mean, this is like an epic fantasy series, but for the most part, a lot of what he writes is science fiction, and he's really, really gifted at writing that too. So, regardless of where you start, it's going to be great. But I do think it's worth getting into his short stories first, because he's so adept at writing all these different styles, or at least within these different genres. That's what has me excited to see what he does next. He could do more science fiction. He could do more contemporary stuff. He could go back into the fantasy world. But I just have total faith that like whatever he chooses to do is going to be thoughtful and interesting. And that's what I like in writers. Yeah, shout out to my mom for recommending The Paper Menagerie to me. It was one of the last books we read together, and it means a lot to me. So, yeah, check it out. He's an author that I've seen in other people's videos before, but not in a ton. I don't think any of like the major fantasy like booktubers and book talkers have really like latched onto him yet. I did see that Murphy Napier had a video with the Dandelion Dynasty in it, which is really cool. So hopefully that gives him a bigger audience. But yeah, totally worth checking out. I'm super passionate about it, and like I want to tell people about it like all the time. So yeah, Ken Liu, Dandelion Dynasty, check it out.